might be like the number one contributor as per number of PRs, and your manager is literally the source of truth, and he can say either those were phenomenal PRs, a lot of very valuable PRs, even if they were just some, I don't know, linter fixes or some removing of dead code or whatever. But it also works the other way around. If those were amazing PRs and there were a ton of them, and your manager can then just say, well, yeah, they were just small linter fixes or just some dead code removal. So it's really unfair.
One thing that people who listen may be surprised to learn is that even with my CV, even with like Google and like a decade plus experience and being a senior software engineer and studied at some of the world's best universities, I still get ignored. They don't actually want to be a software engineering manager or software engineer or a data scientist. They just don't want to do whatever they're doing.
For example, when I join a startup, I have ownership. I am one of the very few people that's building out the idea or the vision that we have. If I slack off, we're not making progress. It doesn't happen, right? So I have responsibility. For me, I like this. I feel responsible for my project, and I want my project to proceed and make progress.
It's very structured, right? I think that with startups, especially if you're going to move around, you're taking your career into your own hands. Google is funny because Google makes a lot of things available to its employees, but still kind of like holds their hand to a great degree, right? And what I mean by that is whenever we hired new people, I would often have a one-to-one if they were in my team or whatever, and I would always give them this advice every single time, every single person for, I don't know, a decade, right? Almost no one followed this advice. And the advice would be this.
Max, here we are again for round 2, just the two of us chatting. But this time, we're not talking about our new podcast. No, this time, we're talking about a new, pretty massive career decision that you made after 12 and a half years at Google. And that's quite a long time, and there are a ton of lessons that you have learned that we'll talk about in this episode. But I'll let you spill the beans, so tell us what's happening and why.
Yeah. So today is the 26th of February, 2026, and tomorrow is my last day at Google as a full-time employee. And why I'm leaving is I'm taking another job, unsurprisingly. And on Monday, I'll be joining Exa AI as their head of knowledge research. And I'll also be the site lead for the new Zurich office that we're building. So when this goes out, that will already have happened. I'll already be set up in the new role. People have already seen this on LinkedIn. But we wanted to do an episode at the end of my 12 and a half years to kind of reflect on all of the things I've learned, all of my perspective, thoughts, because there's probably something useful in there that people can learn from and use in their own careers, or maybe something will resonate with people. With the caveat, right, that all of this is like my own thoughts and lived experience, right? It's not science, it's not facts. And some of it is also a reflection on the times, right? Like technology changes, people change, organizations change. So these are kind of like my thoughts over time distilled.
I think this is great. I mean, I myself am just really interested and curious to learn more. So I'm hopeful, and I'm very optimistic that other people will feel the same way. So I guess the first thing that would be great to start with is, what were things that you really valued about your time at Google? Things that you just enjoyed because they were fun, things where you thought that those had a great impact on your career development. I'm sure that in 12 and a half years, there has been a lot there.
Yeah, so, I mean, the things that kept me at Google for as long as I was the fact that it's an amazing environment for learning and growth. This is enabled both through the ease of internal mobility, like the ability to change teams, change projects, change products, even to change functional areas. But also the fact that they have very nice education reimbursement schemes and kind of employee continuous professional development support structures. So basically, they have different tiers for different areas, but if you're doing what's called work relevant study, so if you're doing like a master's in computer science or business analytics or statistics or any of these things, That's deemed work relevant, assuming you're in a corresponding job, and Google will pay 2/3 up to some amount, and they will give you kind of 5 days study leave per year. And this is amazing. And I personally completed 4 multi-year part-time postgraduate programs while at Google. Similarly, they also have, like, they also support conferences, which also potentially includes travel to said conferences, which is awesome. A great way to learn, a great way to meet people. And as I said, changing roles is like, you know, you're a business analyst and you want to become a software engineer. If you can convince a hiring manager that you can do that, then you can try the interviews. And if you can pass them, then you can become a software engineer, as I did. You know, this is not a super common path, but it can be done clearly. And this moving can also involve geographic moves. So I moved from Dublin to Zurich. It would have been trivial for me to move from, say, Zurich to America if I wanted to with the company. And that's a really awesome thing, right? That, you know, you might decide you want to move somewhere else if the company has an office there and that office has roles that are what you are interested in doing, then you can relatively easily transfer there, which I think is like super useful. Kept me entertained for many, many years.
Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. So it's not just the technical skills that you need and that you learn at Google, but it's also the ability to learn more and to, I guess, also expand your network beyond the boundaries of your hometown, basically, right? Just it's difficult for people to just move abroad to get a new job because of visa issues or just because it's a big deal to do this relocation. But if you're within Google, it sounds to me like it's a great advantage. And
well, I was going to say that, like, especially when you change companies, right, there's all these frictions, you know, like you've got to figure out how do you transfer your pension or how do you get insurance, or you have to update all these different companies and you need to jump through all these hoops. Whereas when you change teams within a large company like Google, it's basically trivial, you know. Sometimes they send you a new contract that is exactly the same in terms of numbers. It just has a different job title on it and you complete.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, yeah, this is really cool. For me, when I moved, I had to move to Tokyo, right? That was like a big deal. Although, again, my company here also helped me a lot with all the logistics. And moving to a country where you don't speak the language and having to even set up internet is something that's a bit more challenging than if I were in a language where I spoke if I were in a country where I spoke the language. But I think one thing that I could always pick up from what you shared just in our own chats was the power of just knowing the right people. And I recall that you said something along the lines that you shouldn't choose your job title, but you should choose your manager. And having this ability to move around like this freely within a company, this seems to be like one of the core lessons that you have learned at that company that you always like to share with me or other people that we talk to. So please, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I kind of thought relatively early on and have thought a lot about since, right? A lot of how you are evaluated in Google and in other companies sometimes is through the lens of your manager, right? You can be having objectively great impact that is shown in many metrics. If your manager doesn't like you, doesn't like your style, they can give you bad ratings. You know, usually maybe there's some checks and balances, but it's limited. And you know, a lot of people, especially earlier on in my career, I would see people optimizing for like being close to something that sounds cool, so they could tell people they'd work on something cool, even if the way they work on it is sort of very tangential to the coolness. Like, what I mean is they work on an app that is attached to a cool thing, and like fundamentally they're an app developer, but because the app is for something machine learning related, they kind of pretend they're doing machine learning, which is fine, you know, to each his own. But like fundamentally what I've noticed, or what's certainly true for me, is that your manager and your relationship with your manager is really important, because especially that's how you're going to get good ratings and how you're going to get promoted and whatever else. And of course, whenever you talk about this topic, people will say, there's more to life than promotion, there's more to careers than promotion. And that's true. But promotion and promotion systems and structures, they govern the behavior of a lot of people in these companies and even the kind of macro level organizational outcomes, right? So it's definitely something that should be thought about, right? That, you know, I've seen, you know, great people not get promoted or even get bad ratings, we'll say, and then move to another very similar team, but a different team, and immediately flip from the worst rating, like it needs improvement in the old system, to the best rating, a superb, and get like a superb, and a promotion. And it's funny because this person was effectively doing the same type of work, like on a support team, doing tickets, supporting sales. The person didn't change. Even in the old team where they were getting a needs improvement, they were objectively the most productive person in the team. Like they were by far the top of the like ticket closing leaderboard, but their manager didn't like them. And as such, they were persona non grata and, you know, borderline fireable, you know, and like, there's not, you know, Google's an amazing company. There's not lots of this. This is not something that I saw all the time, but it's something to be aware of, right? That like, you know, even if you are killing it from your perspective and you think you're hot stuff and you're actually delivering a lot of business value, if your manager doesn't like the way you operate, it may be worth nothing, you know, for you, I mean, in the short term. And sorry, one thing I should also caveat, and this is, I think, one of the things that separates my experience at Google from most of my colleagues is, or was, not everyone has the experience that it's easy to move around the company. Many of my colleagues bemoan the fact that it's difficult or impossible to move. And the fundamental difference between my experience and theirs, as I see it, is that I've always focused and prioritized transferable skills. Always. Like if you ask me to, you know, do something in a cool transferable skill way, like learning a programming language or using an arbitrary internal tool that's only used by this team, I will always opt for the learning a programming language and doing some complicated but transferable cool skill. And of course, that means that you accumulate all these weird and wonderful skills. And then when you go to change team, you happen to have the programming languages of the new team, or you happen to be familiar with the analytics framework or the, you know, whatever else. Many of my colleagues who've had the opposite experience basically have not thought ahead. The best example of this is whenever we hire new people, or whenever we hired, I got to use past tense, you know, I'm kind of confusing myself here. Whenever we hired new people, I would often have a one-to-one if they were in my team or whatever. And I would always give them this advice every single time, every single person for, I don't know, a decade, right? Almost no one followed this advice. And the advice would be this, that they should think about where they want to go in a few years in the company, right? And they should start putting the pieces in place so that they can make that move in a few years, right? So if you join the company and you're an analyst working on a product, that's cool. But where do you want to be in 2, 3, 5 years? Do you want to be a data scientist? Do you want to be a software engineer? Do you want to be a product manager? Depending on which of those you want to do, you should pick projects and develop skills so that in 2 or 3 years, you can apply for that role and be a very strong candidate. Now, my actual experience, what all of these people actually do is they don't do that. They just spend 2 or 3 years doing their core job. They get rewarded, typically, they get promoted. And then when they get promoted, they say, oh, now I want to transfer to software engineering or data science or product management. And no product manager or software engineering manager or data scientist manager is interested in their CV, is interested in their profile, because they've literally demonstrated 0% of what they should have demonstrated. Now, this sounds paradoxical because, I mean, these are smart people, right? And not only are they smart people, I literally told them on their first week or 2, but laziness and life gets in the way and they don't bother to do this. What it screams to me personally is that they don't actually want to be a software engineering manager or software engineer or a data scientist. They just don't want to do whatever they're doing. The person just spent 3 years doing what they're doing, like whatever it was, like being an analyst for some product. You know, at some point their manager says, congratulations, we're making you level 3 or level 4 or level 5 or whatever. And then they think, I wouldn't mind being a software engineer. And it's like they've never written a single line of code in the company. But yeah, this happens so many times. Yeah, it's a funny pattern. But yeah, so if you do invest in those transferable skills, moving will be easier. And I think this is also true externally, right? Like if your skill set is like just diverse and covers a lot of bases, and not just covers them, but also did something cool with these things, then it's obviously going to be easier to find your way into some other company, right? If you want to.
Yeah, I've not had this experience myself because, well, I'm quite junior and have not had that much industry experience yet. But I've talked to people that has had a lot of industry experience and people that have worked at Meta and Google, for example. And one of my favorite colleagues that I spoke to at my previous job, he shared that he had many friends that had very different experiences at Meta, as an example for another big tech company, right? That it just depends so much on the manager that you get. Some people found a niche. They had a very, very pleasant life. They worked on their issue backlog, fixed bugs and all of that, just pure software engineering, and had a chill life. And others were super stressed, overworking like crazy, and the manager was never happy, and all of that within the same company. And this is true for small companies as well. Like you could have like a tiny company with, I don't know, 4 managers, maybe with 4 teams, and just one of them might just not like you, and then you're busted because if you want it or not, your manager holds all the power. And I've also seen other podcasts where that's been discussed, where you might be like the number 1 contributor as per number of PRs, but and your manager is literally the source of truth, and he can say either those were phenomenal PRs, a lot of very valuable PRs, even if they were just some, I don't know, linter fixes or some removing of dead code or whatever. But it also works the other way around. If those were amazing PRs and there were a ton of them, and your manager can then just say, well, yeah, they were just small linter fixes or just some dead code removal. So it's really unfair. And especially if you're a beginner and you just want to, and all you care about is hard skills, right? Just the technical skills of actually doing the work. But once you get past that, it's really surprising how much it is just politics and knowing the right people and having the right teams. I mean, again, I've also heard you talk a lot about that some teams had real energy and pushed forward, and others just slowly died out for whatever reason, right? Sometimes it's just management. Sometimes it's that the engineers don't deliver. I have no idea. I'm certain that it just depends on the team. But again, you have those experiences that you might be able to share. But again, also me just talking to some other friends that have had past experiences at past companies have had very diverse experiences. So yeah, what's in your experience the difference between these two kind of teams? And I guess more importantly for the viewer here, how can you, if you manage to get like into a team at a company, no matter whether it's big tech or not, how can you perhaps recognize the red flags or green flags, and what in an ideal world, what could you then do?
I mean, so I think behind the scenes, obviously a lot of things are politics, right? Like this, managers and things are discussing and who owns what scope is allowed for what team. How this manifests to you as an individual in a team is, your manager literally says, okay, our team own system X, system Y, system Z. The projects that the manager wants to see done are typically just things that improve the systems that you own. Oftentimes, and I think to the company's detriment, sometimes things that are outside of those scopes don't count. Like they're not, as in they obviously have impact, but your manager may tell you like, don't be helping other teams, don't be improving their code base, don't be whatever, because that doesn't help us, which I don't like. It's one of the negative things that I've experienced over the years. And I've seen this in different teams. But I guess as a kind of high level pattern, the thing to watch out for is I think teams are more fun when they have more scope than people, right? When there's like so many things to do and only a few people, because now you can have your pick of all sorts of interesting options. Where they become not fun or very problematic is when you have few good projects and lots of people, because then you end up having the situation where, you know, the manager only has a few projects they can even assign. And some projects are clearly interesting and possibly impactful and hence useful for like one's career growth. And then other projects are almost like filler, like a tech debt reduction, refactoring the system, you know, merge the 8 backends into one backend, and then in another quarter split the one backend into 3 backends, because why not, you know? Like if you're working on those kind of redundant kind of tech debt reduction, kind of like, yeah, you improve the test coverage from like 80 something to 90 something, you know, it's good. You know, it's going to be very hard for you to get a good rating or to get promoted with that kind of project. And again, if that's not something you're concerned about, or at least you think you're not concerned about, then that's fine. It's frustrating if you are. What can be annoying as well, again, depending on your style, like I've always been someone who very much leans towards exploration. Like if you put me on every team I've been on, and there's been many, you know, I very liberally interpret the team's name, and then I just start exploring and finding stuff. You know, I say, okay, I'm in the whatever engineering team, so I'm just going to look all over the place and see what opportunities I can find, and I'm going to identify things people haven't identified, and I'm going to find problems. And ideally, I want to like fix these problems. And again, for managers who prefer to do less work and just have someone autonomously hoovering up loads of new problems, that's amazing. If you're the kind of manager who likes to control what your people do and you like to really micromanage what they're working on, then this is a very annoying person to hire. I always tell in advance all of my managers, if that's who they are, not to hire me. But it's funny because this is like, many engineers are not like this, right? There's a lot of engineers who like the comfort of 100 item backlog and know that they can do 5 a week for 20 weeks and just, you know, get into the flow, right? I'm more the kind of person who makes the backlog grow because I'm filing more bugs than I'm fixing. And I'm fixing some, not that I'm fixing none, but I'm finding all sorts of things. And some of these things are being fixed years later because, wow, it took a while.
Yeah, I think that's just a dynamic that's really difficult to build in every team, right? It's just that's why startups, in my opinion, are so exciting, because I want to hear your thoughts on that as well. For me, depending on the startup, the career growth that you have at a startup is likelier to be significantly larger than when you join like a big tech company, right? For example, when I joined a startup, which I did, I have ownership. I am one of the very few people that's building the idea or the vision that we have. Like if I slack off, we're not making progress. It doesn't happen, right? So I have responsibility, but this just for me. But you really have to have a personality that wants this, right? For me, I like this. I feel responsible for my project, and I want my project to proceed and make progress. Other people might be worried of this responsibility and think to themselves, I need a lead that tells me what to do, right? This can also mean that you're learning new stuff, right? But you have less ownership and you have less responsibility, and it's less you that's pushing the project forward, right? So, and that's what you get at many startups, right? Whether it's like a really deeply technical startup, or if it's a more high-level product focused startup, right? I don't know, like LM wrapper agents or whatever, right? I mean, depending on the complexity of the problems that you want to solve, you might need more creativity or less technical depth, and some need way more technical depth and like domain expertise than others, right? So it depends. But in general, like the ownership that you can have at a startup is significantly higher. Again, you have to have the personality that wants this and that thrives in this environment. Whereas at big tech, again, I've not been at big tech, so I've talked with people that were at big tech, and I'm sure that you have way more to say on this, but it depends on the team, I guess. But fundamentally, you're joining a team, you're joining an existing project. If you are a somewhat junior position, not just a junior, but even if you're a senior, right, you're usually joining a project, then you're leading more junior people. But maybe you can share more on that end. But this is my experience as a startup, which again, I am a big fan of, right?
So I'll have to get back to you in a few months with an answer on what my contrast of being at a startup is, because I technically don't join a startup till Monday. So check back with me in 6 months and I can tell you how I think the two contrast. But it does make logical sense, right? That if you have two people working on something and those two people are the only people in the world working on it, and without them, it just won't happen. It's very different to say a Google where there's, I don't know, 10,000 people working on ad sales for something, and if one of them doesn't sell any ads, it doesn't make a difference because there's 9,900 other ones. But yeah, I mean, it is the case that the Google progression system in engineering, at least, is structured in a way that, you know, you start at L3, like a software engineer. You know, you're being kind of given small pieces of a bigger system to kind of design and implement, and you're getting a lot of like feedback from the tech lead, more senior engineers in terms of like how you're doing it, and you're kind of learning by doing. And then after a few years, they say, pat on the back, they say, good job, you're doing great, we're now promoting you to level 4. And now you're expected to own larger pieces and kind of do it more independently, so have like maybe less feedback. Again, you do this for a few years, you land a bigger, meatier thing, or like big pieces of like important systems or whatever, then they kind of pat you on the back again and say, congratulations, you're now a L5 senior software engineer. And then, I mean, there's progression beyond that, right? Where, you know, they come and say, okay, after a few more years, either you've done something technically amazing and like really solved some unsolved problem, or you've, you know, grown into more of a like leader or manager, and then they kind of pat you on the back for that and move you to staff, and then repeat senior staff, repeat principal. But, you know, obviously if you join a startup, potentially on day one, you're like the only one of 8 people who is in charge of front end, you know what I mean? Or the only person in charge of machine learning. And of course that is a very different experience. I guess, you know, I mean, from the other perspective, there's obviously much more like risk when you have a multi-billion-dollar project with hundreds of millions of users versus like, this is me and John's calendar app that we made, vibe coded. So yeah, it definitely strikes me that it's probably good, interesting to get both experiences. And to one of your points, right, you said that like, at Google or big companies, you tend to be doing a small part of a big thing. That is entirely true. One of my early thoughts when I did my internship at Google was how funny and how constrained it was. Like I was in marketing finance for EMEA, right? So that was like literally you're in a finance team looking at the spending of the marketing team for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, right? So like literally that was our job, to keep an eye on how much the marketing team are spending in that part of the world. You know, whereas previously I was like a management consultant for like a digital marketing, insurance company that was doing a lot of digital marketing. And I was just kind of looking at everything. I was running all over the company, talking to everyone, looking at everything. And then I come here and I'm just looking at like, how much are the marketing team spending in this slice of the world, you know? I mean, can't look too far east because that's APAC. Can't look too far west because that's Americas, you know what I mean? Can't look at, you know, finance for sales because that's a different team, you know, just marketing. And it's true as you move around as well, right? That like you join like finance business intelligence, right? And you do data pipelines for finance data, you know, there's a different team that does geo data or other data, you know. But something that I only did in my very end of my time at Google was to actually build more like greenfield projects. When I say greenfield, I mean like new to the world, like fresh projects. Like a lot of what I did was you join a team, as you say, that was already established, and you just start optimizing something that already exists. You kind of tweaking it, making it faster, adding new features. That is obviously interesting, and it's a great way to learn things, and you obviously see projects in different stages of development. But one thing that I personally enjoy, and maybe startups have more of this, is this greenfield development, when you have a problem and you're literally building the first solution and iterating. And because it's a new thing, you have less constraints, right? You're not worried about breaking the behavior with the old thing because the old thing doesn't exist. And this lets you be more reckless, more creative. I've definitely enjoyed this. Again, some teams at Google do this. It's just the nature of the team. Many teams don't, right? And I mean, again, if you're joining, depends where you are. I mean, when you talk to your hiring manager, maybe you can kind of get a feel for it. If he says, oh yeah, we maintain the Android security stack, then you can be pretty sure that's a established thing. If someone says, oh yeah, we're an innovation team tasked with finding novel uses for something, and you're like, that sounds like you might build some fresh innovation.
It's in the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it's, I don't know. For me, when I was going to college, for me it was, oh yeah, big tech. You're part of a bigger thing, but you never thought about that you could be the bigger thing yourself, or a small team can be a big thing, right? Of course, like you have a lot of impact because you ship one small thing and it impacts like millions of people, like with just one push to prod, basically. But I know, what would you say are like the fundamentally different things that you might learn in big tech versus like a startup, right? Because again, they both of them are building products or doing research, right? All of this is transferable to a certain degree with research and product, I guess. But what would you say is like the advantage of going to big tech for the purpose of learning?
I mean, well, the biggest advantage I would say of going to big tech, if someone has that offer out of college or whatever, is the branding, right? Is like, and again, this is obviously not just true of big tech, but like other high prestigious brands have this too, right? If you're ex Google or ex McKinsey or ex whatever, that helps, right? Especially also because once you have these big companies with their established bureaucracies, the levels meaning transfers outside of the company. And what I mean by that is, if I see someone at a startup or some company I've never heard of, and they have a title like senior software engineer, no one really knows what that means, right? Like they call all their software engineers senior software engineers. What does that mean? Whereas if you see someone at Google who is called senior software engineer, then they've jumped through the kind of bureaucracy hoops at Google for several years. It's not a perfect metric. I definitely don't think that all staff software engineers are greater than all seniors and all seniors are greater than all L4s. Quite the opposite. But, it definitely carries a lot of like weight in the market. Like future jobs, whatever, will benchmark on what defined level you have somewhere. Maybe overly so. But one thing I think as well that is good with something like, big tech is it's very structured, right? I think that with startups, especially if you're going to move around, you're taking your career into your own hands. And like Google is funny because Google makes a lot of things available to its employees, but still kind of like holds their hand to a great degree, right? And what I mean by that is this, right? Many people, apply, interview, get hired, and they have very little idea what they want to do with their life or career, or they're not very open about it if they do. All they know they want to do is get promoted at least a few times until they're reaching some kind of terminal level that they kind of feel like, oh, I just want to get to L5 or 6 or whatever, and then they're just going to cruise for the rest of their life. And it's funny because they're so uninformed about what they want to do that like one of the things that we do regularly is every 6 months or so, our manager is supposed to have a career one-to-one with us, right? A talk where they talk about your career, where you want to go, how you want to develop. And I was once told by a very tenured, like 20-year Google manager, that only about 5% of employees he's ever had an idea themselves, like had a career plan, knew roughly what they wanted to do. 95% just wait for him to ask them and then just kind of say they want to get promoted. Now, that's obviously not a exact statistic. That's some anecdote from a secondhand anecdote, but it does match my own experience, right? Like the vast majority of my colleagues didn't ever, either they didn't have a plan or they didn't even want to speak to an aspirational plan, maybe because they might fail and that might be embarrassing. But they would literally just be like, oh, I just want to get promoted, or I just want to get promoted, or I just want to get promoted. And you're kind of like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's good to get more money and more status and whatever. But like for me, whenever I would have these one-to-ones, these career one-to-ones, it would be me telling my manager my plans, my ideas. It would not be them telling me, hey, you should become a specialist in this or that. Like, whereas for many of my peers, they would get angry, or they would mark it bad in the feedback survey if their manager hadn't had this one-to-one with them. And I'm kind of like, if you want to talk about your career, just talk about it. Just say it to them any day. You have one-to-one every week. Just bring it up. You shouldn't need that guy to raise it every 6 months. You should just raise it as often as you want to raise it, right? So I do think, sorry, to answer your question, I think that structure is what is nice, right? That like you can join out of college not knowing what you want to do with your life, 22, 23, whatever. At L3, kind of just do what you're told for a few years, get promoted to level 4, maybe do what you're told a bit more, maybe have one original idea, get promoted to level 5, and then it gets harder to get promoted again. And potentially, you do some good work and stay in put for a few years, and then you get promoted again. And then maybe at 30 something, you might decide what you want to do with your life. And you've obviously at this point built up like a stock of cash, of status, of, experience. And maybe then you can choose like, actually, I want to go and specialize in this or that or whatever else. So that's very nice. I think if you did the other path, if you just joined a random startup, maybe it IPO'd and you made life-changing money, or maybe it didn't. And maybe you jump to another startup where you earn less money, and then you join to another startup where you earn more or less money. Like it's maybe one of them calls you senior, but you earn less money than the one where you were junior. Who knows,
It's high, it certainly is higher variance. And I am certain, confident in saying that not all startups are equal, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, if it's your random calendar startup, like, I don't know. If it's like, hey, I mean, I have a nice calendar app that I like. It's not the Apple native one, but anyway. But yeah, it just very much depends on the startup. So, but also to get into the startup that is a bit more higher profile and will have a seed fund, a $1 billion valuation. Right, it's at whatever round it will be in the future. I mean, either you're good enough to do that on your own, or you're good enough to be in an environment where you know people that build this kind of startup, or you just get lucky. But the latter is obviously a bit less likely and less. You shouldn't rely on that, right? But one story that I have, for example, is of a friend of mine who did his PhD in machine learning, and during his PhD did an internship at DeepMind. And while he was doing that internship at DeepMind, there was another intern, another PhD student. Both of them had the internship at the same time. After the internship was done, they left DeepMind, went back to their PhD. Both of them at roughly the same time finished their PhD. And my friend joins DeepMind as an basically entry-level PhD, as much as entry-level PhD position you can get. And the guy that went to that he had this the internship with, he joined a startup. Now, this was a Canadian startup at the time, very early stage. The startup was called Cohere. And nowadays, it's a pretty big startup. And after 2 years of working at Cohere, during this other intern also joined DeepMind. So both of them finished the PhD at the same time. Both of them had 2 years of industry experience, basically. And my friend at DeepMind is, I don't know if he leveled up one position or if he's still on the same level, but what he told me is that this guy that had the same internship experience, that just joined Cohere, same 2 years of experience in the industry, now then joined 2 levels above him at DeepMind. So what does this tell us? I don't know. This is just a single sample. Obviously, it's not generalizable, but he got lucky that he went to a good startup. Like, I have no doubt that he had the good technical skills. Otherwise, he would not be able to join that startup and, I guess, produce that kind of impact that he had. But the environment that he was in allowed for this impact such that he could then jump to a much higher level afterwards, right?
So it's definitely the case that, like, I mean, leveling is like a cause of a lot of like discussion and frustration and whatever else, right? Like, ultimately, the level that you would typically be offered is based on what they look at you currently being, right? With a little bit extra to kind of lure you in, right? So if you're at Meta or Nvidia and you're LX, they'll put you at LX plus 1, right? If they're trying to get you, maybe they'll offer you LX first, and if you don't take it, then they'll offer you LX plus 1. You know, it's and other companies will do the same, right? It's very hard to, I mean, evaluate these things, right? What skills people have, and especially when you just ask people to implement like weird data structures and algorithms. Like, this guy's definitely LH. Research, you know, he knows how to.
Yeah.
He knows how to do prefix sum really well.
Different.
But even then, it's like, you know, you're having a discussion about transformer architecture, or like you're having a discussion about like, you know, overfitting. You know, what, you know, like, I always found it. One question I used to always ask about Google. We have these leadership interviews, or we had leadership interviews. And so much of what we call leadership at the lower levels is so banal. And I always used to ask, what happens if someone gives a real leadership example? Like, you know, you ask someone of an example of a time they showed leadership, and they're supposed to say, oh, this one time I wanted to organize a team offsite and nobody was organizing it. So I said, hey, everyone, let's go on a team offsite. And then they did. And I'm like, that's not leadership. I mean, it's nice. It's helpful. Maybe it helps build the team spirit, you know, but what's leadership to me is I once sent 20 people to their deaths in a war to save hundreds, you know what I mean? That's like, oh, wow, you know, like, this guy is actually like, well, holy moly, like, I'm actually talking to someone who knows what leadership means, you know? Like, this person knows what trade-offs are. It's like, but like, you know, until that point, I mean, you know, like, what kind of leadership is an intern going to have? Like, oh, I was the class captain in the Go team. You're like, cool, thanks, good, tick, that's leadership, right? Whereas, you know, when they're like L7, you're like, oh, I once made a decision that affected the work of 60 engineers. And you're like, cool story, bro. I changed the temperature in the office and all the engineers were too warm, you know? You know, it's very hard to evaluate, and you're evaluating it based on people's utterances, right? Like, they literally are asking you a question and you're just saying, here's a story, you know, tell me about a time you had a challenge in work, and you're like, oh, I was dealing with a difficult colleague, and you know, so like this, and I mean, I think what you said about startups is like, if the startup is like prestigious or, you know, whatever, then of course those levels are really valued. Like, if you're, you know, a director at a named startup, then it suddenly has this weight, right? But there is a kind of strange reality to it, which is that to become a director at a startup, potentially you just join early, and then a lot of the early employees are directors in a few years because the growth rate is so high. Whereas at a company like Google, like Google was so I'm actually leaving. I'm about the 95th, 96th percentile of employee tenure at Google. So I'm one of the most, like, you know, like, rare Googler has been at Google longer than me. And I kind of joined in 2013 and kind of was there through a lot of the end of the growth years, right? And for that period, the company was growing like so quickly. Like we were hiring so many people. So teams were like getting constantly new people, and then people were being promoted literally to manage the kind of just growing mass of people. That has really stopped, or at least stopped in some sites like Zurich, for example, since the end of 2022. The Zurich has basically been flat in terms of size office for since end of 2022. And because it's flat, now we have this situation where there aren't juniors really to ramp up or to have them work on your projects. So this idea of like joining a startup and, it growing to hundreds of people and you becoming a director just by valor of being there for a couple of years, is completely the opposite, in some of these larger established players, right? I don't think that's specific to Google. I think that's probably the same if you go to IBM or a Microsoft or something as well, right? They're not in all these sites growing like hand over fist. So it's not like you can be part of this like double digit growth, quarter on quarter in terms of headcount, maybe revenue.
I guess then that begs the question, what would you do differently, right? Does that just mean that what people in tech usually do, from what I can tell, is that every 2 years they switch the job, because when switching a job, you get a level +1, right? So I don't know if that holds anymore or not.
I would say that's not been my experience in Europe. I see that, or I hear about that in America, where there's a lot of opportunity. But in my experience working for Google, mostly across Europe, there hasn't really been that many competitors or like offerings, right? Like, well, I was in Dublin for years, and yes, Dublin has a very big Google office, and it also now has big Meta offices, and it has offices from other companies. But it wasn't that common that people would leave Google and move to these other companies. And similarly with Zurich, Zurich now is kind of diversifying, but it was historically predominantly Google. Even today, Google is bigger than all of the other big tech put together, and startups probably in terms of headcount. So it hasn't been the case, from my experience, that most people move every 2 years. Most Googlers, in fact, were just sort of staying put and growing within the company. I think, again, since the kind of hiring freeze or whatever of end of 22 and the layoffs of 23, more and more Googlers are leaving. Like I started seeing like exit emails where people are saying, hey, it's been great. Thank you for the amazing experiences. And that's a relatively new phenomenon. I do think what you described is a better strategy. And one of the things I would do differently is I would interview more. I would interview more often. I would interview much earlier. I wouldn't necessarily have taken these opportunities because, Google is great. It's not that it's not great. There's no problems at all. But it's just more that you're practicing interviewing, you're practicing selling yourself to other companies. You're seeing what skills are needed. You're seeing how strong your CV is. And this is very useful. Plus, if something bad does happen, maybe you already have interviews in the calendar, So like, especially in big tech, one of the things that's funny with the tech side of big tech, so engineering roles, is these tech interviews, right? Like many of our listeners will already be familiar with this idea of like data structures and algorithms interviews, where, you as a candidate are given some kind of problem and you need to realize like what data structure or algorithm solves this problem. And then you have to write code, historically on a whiteboard, sometimes in a Google Doc or some sort of web IDE. And then if your code solves the problem and it's efficient and whatever else, your interviewer will give you a thumbs up, and you do that a few times, you get the job offer, right? This, even if you are a software engineer, even if you're a software developer, is not like your day-to-day job. Even if you are doing those jobs, typically if you are going to one of these big companies and you really want the job in Meta or Nvidia or whoever, you will want to spend a few weeks or months revising the theory, revising the implementations. You'll want to be quick, that when someone asks you a question, you go, oh, this is union find, so I would implement the best version, which is union find with path compression and weighted union or whatever by depth or something, by rank.
I am very happy that I'm in research. Jesus.
But again, even if you're in research, right, you need to like practice your transformer architecture every day of the week, so that someone's like, please implement.
I work with that every day. I work with that every day. I know that shit.
But again, the point is that even if you work with things, at a certain level of abstraction, then you don't remember necessarily the details, right? Like the problem is, you may be using certain like Java libraries and everything is immutable because that's a best practice. But then when you do these interviews, they want you to do everything in C++ for some reason, and you're just like, oh, better brush up on my C++, right? Or my Rust or my Golang. And the thing is, because this is awkward and painful and requires a few weeks or months of study, people defer it a lot. And I personally am guilty of this. Like I basically I didn't really interview for many companies for the first, 8 years of my time at Google. And then around the kind of 8-year mark, I did some interviews. I interviewed for Stripe. Some went well, some went not so well. It's funny, actually, some of the things that went not so well were things that were quite alien to my experience at Google. Like I didn't have like a local IDE set up, so that was bad. I also wasn't that familiar with some of the kind of core Python libraries that they seem to love because, again, we don't use JSON at Google, we use Protos. But yeah, I didn't get that offer anyway. I interviewed for Meta at some point, NVIDIA. Incidentally, I interviewed at NVIDIA after they were already like multi-trillion-dollar company, so I missed the boat. Though I applied about 6 or 7 times before they were a trillion-dollar company. So that would have been a fun one to get on early, but I was always ignored. Honestly, I like on reflection, I think it's good to always be, have job alerts for relevant things on LinkedIn at least in your city where you live, and just apply for things. And at the very least, you're getting signal as to whether they respond to you or not. Like one thing that people who listen may be surprised to learn is that even with my CV, even with like Google and like a decade plus experience and being a senior software engineer and studied at some of the world's best universities, I still get ignored by for most of my applications. Like if I send out 10 applications, maybe I get 2 invites to interview or to even have a call with the recruiter. And then, of course, some of those, like our recruiter call might lead nowhere. Like literally, they kind of just sort of scope you out, see if that your profile matches any one of the roles they have, and maybe it's nothing. Which again, maybe is a problem that I'm not selling myself right. Or it could be that like, I'm just not the right candidate, I suppose. Like maybe I just have the wrong skill set. But then once you actually do interview, if you get that far, it's good practice, right? And of course, if you don't care as much, then you don't need to spend weeks prepping or months prepping. But on the plus side, if you do prep regularly, then it keeps these things kind of more fresh in your mind. Like if you've actually interviewed a few times, had to implement a few transformers, then it's not as alien when you need it, or if you've implemented a few red black BSTs or bidirectional Dijkstra's or whatever you want, keeps you fresh, And also it's free networking. Like once you interview with these companies, you meet all your interviewers, right? You can connect with them on LinkedIn. You can keep an eye on what they're up to. Maybe you can be contacted again in the future. It's nice. And like if you do get as far as the like offer stage, that's actually interesting. So I've only gotten to that stage a few times in my life, but that's very interesting because again, it would be good to have had more practice at that stage, because that's the stage you can generate a lot of value for yourself. If you're good at negotiating or know how to do it, potentially it can mean like tens of thousands extra per year, by being good at it, right? Like if you ask for more in the right way a few times, bada bing, bada boom, that's a lot,
Yeah, I definitely don't have that experience, and I know that there's way more that I can learn at that to be able to handle those situations. But I mean, I guess you were interviewing and you were in the pipeline for different jobs. And after 12 and a half years, after, let's say, 4 years of interviewing, 4.5 years of interviewing on and off, at what point did you know it was time to go? So you got an offer and you now took that offer. And what was it that made you actually pull the trigger?
So even though I interviewed at around the 8-year mark, I only interviewed like briefly and then stopped interviewing again until the kind of the 10-year mark. And I've basically been interviewing relatively regularly from the kind of 10-year mark to today. Like, so about 2.5 years or so of interviewing various companies. Not super regularly, like maybe once every few weeks or whatever else. And, you know, again, very much gets to different stages in terms of like the process. Like sometimes it's like, you know, you have a recruiter call and then you part ways. Sometimes it's, you know, you go and do formal interviews and you fail. Sometimes it's you go and do formal interviews and then you get offers and then you negotiate and then you decline. Like for me, in my mind, I had this idea that 10 years is kind of like the right period of time to do something in your life or in your career. So 10 years at Google was my time to leave. Unfortunately, it just took longer than that to find something that I think was promising enough to leave. That's the downside of a company that's so great.
Suffering from success.
Yeah, exactly right. A victim of your own success. I almost joined NVIDIA about 1.5 years ago, but didn't. Though that was the closest I came. And now obviously I am leaving now and joining EXA. I mean, what I like, there's a lot of things I like about EXA, and I think we'll talk more about them on future episodes, but you know, the story of how I got in contact with EXA is hilarious. I think our listeners will appreciate this, right? Basically, a few years ago, a researcher named Sebastian Bruch wrote a book on vector search, like a math book, and it's called Foundations of Vector Retrieval. We can link it in the show notes. And so I purchased a copy and I read it, as I do. And when I'm reading things, especially if I'm reading like technical things or like more difficult things that I actually want to really understand and internalize, I often like read them with a highlighter and a pen and, you know, make notes in the margins and things like that. So I read this book, highlighting a bunch of it and like making little annotations. And especially when I was like working through some of the proofs, I would like maybe like add a little comment as to where I missed something or where I found it harder to follow and whatever. And then a few weeks later, I found myself in hospital. I was having some surgery and I was bored. And so I had the book with me that was heavily annotated on my laptop. And I decided I would type up all my feedback and email it to him. And I didn't know him, remember, this is the point, right? Like he's just a random internet man. So I typed up my feedback and I emailed it to him, and it was, I don't know, like 10 A4 pages maybe. And it was very specific, granular stuff. This is not like a high level review of my feelings. This is like, hey, it would be cool to define this here before we use it. And it would be good to have an extra line on this proof that does this thing here, because it would be easier to follow, and maybe expand this a bit, you know, like it was very concrete. It was like, hey, this could be a little clearer if we disambiguated this versus that. Like something you could basically probably apply in a morning on your book and it's just better. And I sent it to him and I got like a email a few days later that said like acknowledged, thank you, but like nothing else. And then about 6 weeks later, I got a big long email that was like, thank you so much. I just looked at the feedback. It's amazing. It's really good. It's awesome. And I was like, cool. You know, this guy appreciates my random agentic weirdness. And then a few years later, he emails me and he's like, hey, I'm the advisor to this startup, EXA. And he's like, I'm talking to the CEO and he's looking for engineers in the space. And I suggested that you'd be one of the best people for the job. Would you be interested in being connected with him? And I said, sounds amazing. Like, why not? So I then, once I knew I was going to meet this CEO of EXA, Will, I immediately started doing my due diligence, you know, like researching it online, you know, watching some YouTube interviews with him about the company. Saw a lot of the kind of important kind of metrics in terms of like how the company was doing, the growth rate, the kind of Y Combinator backing. All looked very interesting, very promising. A lot of good media online. I was like, okay, seems promising. And it was also in the space that I'm working in for the last few years. So I thought, that's very nice. So I got on the first call with Will, and he was like, hey, you know, would you be interested in this company and coming to San Francisco? And I was like, how about Zurich? And, you know, I think at first he was not convinced, but I think I convinced him. So what's interesting to me is it's not just like I'm going to a competitor to do the same thing. I'm going to a startup to build the next generation of thing. You and kind of lead an office, build a team. That's all really interesting and cool. Plus, I think being a startup, it's going to be much more amenable to my like very broad interests and skill set, right? That like if I help build the company's profile through my media or whatever public profile, that's a really valuable in a way that it doesn't matter at Google, right? Like who cares if Google has one more prolific engineer, whereas here I can help to really put X on the map for thousands of people, and then they'll try it and then they'll love it and then we'll all be good.
This is again really cool. This is something that we also talked about in our last episode, basically, right? Or one of our last episodes. Yeah, this notion of agency, just you just writing an email to the author of the book that's then helped you months or years later. I mean, that's the definition of just being agentic or proactive and just do. You probably didn't even think of the option of him inviting you to join another startup where he's the advisor. He just wanted to learn and reach out to people and share your feedback, right? It was nothing more complicated behind. I mean, obviously it's good to have the networking in mind, but like nothing concrete. And I myself find this also very challenging, right? To think about how much time do I have for doing these things on the side. I mean, for me, it's also different because I am at a startup and we have a high pace and we have to deliver a lot, right? But I guess if you are at a more normal job, right? Not a early stage startup with high pace. I think this just helps you. It seems to help you at your current job anyway, to just spend more time studying and learning. And it also sets you up for future success, right? So it's a good balance to have time for learning and like specifically just learning new content and building your own skill set, which may or may not be related to what your actual day-to-day tasks are. And I think this is like a really cool lesson that people should know of, and I think many people know of, but very, very few people exercise. As you also mentioned in your early story, where Google has an offering of supporting your education, right? But very few people actually take advantage of this.
Yeah, actually, that's one thing I would say on what you just said. One thing that's funny to me, or an interesting observation after my 12 and a half-ish years at Google, is that like you just said there, like obviously you have a high-paced startup, and so you don't have time for, I don't know, doing weird side projects, or less time. A lot of people at Google would say the same. In fact, almost everyone I know at Google who's not me would say the same. Would say like, oh, I don't have time to learn because my job is so demanding, or I don't have time to learn because, Google is so hard. And like, whenever I, as I said earlier, ask someone, hey, you want to go to this conference with me next month or year or whatever, they're like, oh, I'd like to, but I don't want to fall behind on my OKRs or something. Again, as though 1 day or 2 days or 3 days in a conference is going to make you fall behind on a annual goal, which obviously it won't. But I think people just tend to make excuses. Like, it's not objectively about like everyone I talk to in life says, oh, later when I have more free time. Like, there's no, this magical time that will come when you have more free time is never going to come. It hasn't come yet. It's not coming. It feels like it's a bit like a coping strategy that people have.
Well, I guess so. I guess very much so. But it's difficult because I guess it just depends on personality. I mean, what do you really want to have spend that extra time? Do you have a family and kids that demand your attention, right? As many people have different life circumstances, and it depends on whether they want something and they want it as much to make the sacrifices, and do they have the space given their current circumstances to make these sacrifices, right? I mean, if you have kids, like, not spending the weekends with, at least some time on the weekend with your kids is, I mean, some people might want to do that. I don't think it's maybe, but whatever they want to do is whatever they want to do. But it's difficult. It's difficult for some people and it's less difficult for others.
I mean, I put it this way, like I totally think it's a personality thing. But what I think is funny is I think most people don't pretend like it is, or they don't be honest about the fact that they're not going to do something, right? They'd always rather say, oh, I'm going to learn about this, and then never do it, never make any progress. Like I could check in with them 5 years later, 10 years later, they still haven't done it. But to me, the question is, why would you, like, don't get me wrong, plans change. Like there's things that I thought I would go and do, and then you don't for reasons, right? But more often than not, if I say I'll do something, I'll do it. You know, if I want to learn something, and I will learn it, you know, I will. Yeah, like I won't say I'm going to learn something unless I'm already going down the garden path. I'm going to learn the thing, you know. I'm not just saying it like because it's a good thing to say, right? And again, I mean, absolutely. Like if you say like, oh, I just want to work 20 hours a week and cruise and spend my time with my family, then that's totally fine. Like do that. Absolutely. Just own it. Just say that's my life, you know. I'm secretly working half-time while it's very obvious from the metrics, but like no one seems to care, you know.
As I mentioned, I've heard the stories of my colleagues where some people find that niche and can work that way. Others have less luck of finding like a hole where they can hide in and have like this cruising lifestyle. But yeah, it also depends exactly. It also just depends on what you want. For example, maybe someday in the future, again, when I have other responsibilities, I would want that. But currently, I want high velocity. I want ownership. I want to build stuff and be responsible for my work and learn a lot. The only thing that I know is worth maximizing is learning density. Right? Of course, I also have hobbies, and sometimes I'm a bit sad that I don't get to explore Japan as much as I want to. And that may change in future. Again, it just depends on the phase of a project. But it's really, really personality dependent, as you said.
Yeah. I actually have a note about this in my reflections doc, right? Which is, it's titled Stop Saying, Start Doing, related to the above, right? And basically I pontificate about the fact that I meet so many people who want to get into the right team to do cool work, right? And I always tell people, don't be that person, right? You should start doing cool work in your current team. Start like building little apps, collabs, whatever. And just doing that will make it easier to get into the cool team. But it will also let you see whether you actually like doing that or whether you like the idea of cool, right? Because if you don't actually like it, then you should do something else. But you also then keep learning through all of this, right? Because one thing that I find funny, and again, comes back to that point about giving people advice when they join, right? Like past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, right? Like if someone is not doing any automation in their current team, it's unlikely they'll do it in a future team. You know, if someone is, you know, of course there is some degree of flexibility here. Like if someone has a lot of C++ experience and I join a Python team, I'm pretty sure they'll learn Python. I'm not worried about that. You know, but if someone is like not doing any software engineering and then they want to transfer to software engineer, you're like, do you though? And again, especially like if someone says, oh, I would like to learn it, but you know, there's just no time, then there'll never be time. You know, I mean, if they want to take a sabbatical for a few months and go and do that, I don't think they do. And I don't think it makes sense anyway.
Do you have anything else that you've noted down that you think is really, really worth reflecting on and sharing with our audience?
I don't know. Like I mean, some of the things I've noted down are kind of very like Google centric and kind of probably not as useful to many of our listeners. One thing I would say, like, you know, as I've obviously mentioned, is investing in transferable skills and like CV wins. I've been framing it since I started, right? It's like, you know, if you have a choice between doing something kind of that's definitively good on your CV or not, take the CV win and put it on your CV because it'll help you change teams, change companies, move up in the world if that's what you want to do. And this is not just like technical skills in like C++ or Java or whatever, PyTorch. It can also be like, communication, presentation, statistics, whatever you want. One thing that I think is funny here as well is this, like, if anyone has seen Karate Kid, Master Miyagi, he has the boy learn how to do karate by having him do weird everyday tasks. And this is part of what I think is good about these big companies compared to maybe startups. We talked about that earlier, right? So, you're learning karate by painting fences and cleaning cars, right? So some things at Google that you're pushed to do for like the promotion process are actually also helping you internalize these skills, right? You're basically being pushed to like lead a small group of people or engineers. And at first it feels kind of like fake work, because it kind of is, because maybe they don't need any leadership and maybe you're not really providing any leadership. But through doing it, you do internalize some of the process, some of the important knowledge, right? And you do learn the lesson, by painting the fence. That's pretty funny. It's pretty cool. One thing that I think personally has been a strange thing that was missing for me in Google, or at least not widespread enough at Google, is statistics. Obviously, there's some areas of Google that are like full of amazing statisticians, in fact, like world famous ones. But in general, across engineering, I was surprised how many like excellent computer scientists don't have a solid background in statistics. And okay, I'm biased because I like statistics, but I also think, like, especially as we get closer to machine learning and more like things that need to be kind of empirically kind of validated, and where we're trying to sift the signal from the noise, statistics is really, really important and really, really valuable if you understand these things. It does scale really well. If you have someone who knows these things, can build a tool that everyone can use, that's great, because then everyone just gets this lovely dashboard of like green and red, and they can decide based on the wisdom of the person who built it. But it's definitely something that I think is like undervalued. Yeah, one thing that's actually funny, or that I saw, especially in my earlier time at Google, was what I call golden handcuffs, right? So I knew a few people who got promoted several times within the same job without, as I see it, developing the skills you'd expect from that job, right? So I saw like analysts get promoted from level 2 to level 4 in a team, and only having very limited like analytical skills, like maybe some basic SQL, maybe they could use a little bit of Excel or Google Sheets. And then when this person would try to change teams, transfer to another analyst role in a different team, they would always fail the interview, because like if you look at the description of an analyst, it requires things like statistics or Python for data analysis, Colab. And a few times these people left Google, go externally. And I guess my thought here is that you shouldn't become these people unintentionally. I mean, if you want to do it intentionally, fine. Like if you just want to get promoted and earn more money and you don't want to change team ever, then fire ahead. If you do want to if you want to have flexibility and mobility in your career, then definitely don't do that. If those are the skills that are expected of an analyst, learn them, develop them. Yeah, I have this one interesting nugget. Basically, that people need to find a sweet spot between these two aphorisms, right? One is that you're not good enough at this job to be too good for this job, which is in relation to people like being too good for a job. Like a lot of people in Google are like very, very highly qualified. It's very competitive to get into, obviously. And so a lot of people, even at the bottom level, even at level 2 in when I was working in Dublin, or level 3 in engineering, a lot of them have PhDs in computer science, and they're level 3 software engineers, or they're level 2 in sales in whatever Dublin, and they have an MBA already, right? And they're like, oh, I should be much higher because I've got an MBA from some school in Australia. But they're not actually necessarily objectively good at their job. Like they're not particularly high on the like sales leaderboard, or they're not producing a lot of code or whatever in spite of their PhD in computer science. It's a funny kind of observation, right? Like the competition is high and is tricky. And then the other thing is, and this is kind of relates to what I was saying about interviewing and things, is that your job isn't your job. Your job is to find a better job. So even if you have a good job, you should still be interviewing, because there's maybe a job out there that you didn't know existed that might be even better for you, help you grow, whatever else. Like one thing I learned way too late at Google, and this is something all of my Google, all of our Google listeners should listen to, is that if you get an offer from a competitor, you can submit that for a retention grant, and your leadership chain can approve a huge lump of Google equity on top of your pay packet to keep you in the company. So if you do what I said and you just keep interviewing, eventually Meta will offer you 20% more than you make at Google, and Google will offer you 40% more than that to keep you if they like you, which is not a bad situation to be in. I personally never succeeded in this, but the theory is sound. I know others who have. Yeah. Actually, I have a few more funny anecdotes. One funny anecdote, actually, this is pretty funny. And the guy who I'm talking about will know exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, this is a fun anecdote about level hierarchy and compensation. So on one of the teams I was on, we got a new hire. And he was so happy and so grateful to be hired at Google. His new compensation at Google was like 2.5x his previous compensation, right? Like it was significantly higher in the same city, same country, right? So he was euphoric all day. I was hanging out with him for his first day in the company. He was so happy, like glowing smile all day. And at the end of the workday, at 6 p.m., myself, himself, and another colleague, the guy who had referred him to Google, went for a beer. Over the beer, the new hire was elated, telling this story about how he got 2.5x his previous comp. And then the referrer guy said, "It only gets better from here. I'm level X plus 1 and I earn 25% more than that." Instantly, the new hire's elation turned to frustration and jealousy. Immediately, he was like, "Why does that guy earn more than me? Well, I should be getting more than him. I should be getting at least as much as him. I have an extra master's degree," or whatever nonsense, right? And it was just so funny to see this thing, right? This social psychology fact for reality, right? That like, even though that other guy was in the company several years, and this guy was literally there one day, he immediately was like, there's this fact or this like observation repeatedly where it's better to earn more than the people around you, even if objectively it's less. That like it's better to earn 60,000 in a world where everyone earns 50,000 than to earn 80,000 in a world where people earn 100,000. If you feel higher, you feel better about yourself.
Yeah, that's always a trap that everyone. It's very, very easy as a human being to fall into, to adjust to the new the previously exciting becomes the new normal.
And in this case, you're like, okay, very quickly, the hedonistic treadmill, it was a very fast hedonistic adaptation, Yeah, one thing is too, I would advise people to play to their relative strengths, right? As far as I'm concerned, a good manager would realize that a team should have a range of skills. Like you don't want 5 guys who quietly sit in the corner and code, nor do you want 5 guys who are out making connections and finding opportunities for the team, but don't actually write enough code. You want some mix, maybe 4 to 1. 4 coders, 1 finder. Obviously, there needs to be some common context or language, right? But each person can and probably should specialize in different areas, right? And these areas are not like permanent life specializations. It's not like you are the database guy for life, but maybe you just happen to know a bit more about this space or that space. Maybe you happen to know more about statistics or whatever else. Like on one of my teams where this worked quite well, me and the other engineers worked on kind of different levels. We kind of approach problems different ways. Like I tended to work more on like the application level, like looking at how users use things and finding all sorts of superficial but like user affecting problems that could just make things run smoother, seamlessly, automate things so people have to do less. Whereas we had this other colleague who was like a really deep like C++ expert, where he would like profile things and find the like actual bottlenecks, find where the CPU was spending time and squash some of these things and lead to like huge savings across not just the team's code base, but maybe the whole company code base. And for me, those are always my favorite kinds of teams because you can learn more from people who have a slightly different perspective to yourself, right? And of course, ideally, you need a manager who supports that.
Yeah, exactly. You need a manager that supports that, and you need a team or a project that supports that as well, right? And I think, if you get thrown into a project, my favorite. Again, this is also a personal anecdote here. My favorite situation, what I have figured out over the few years now, is that I also like just to learn new things, and getting thrown into like a project and be like, okay, well, this is the project that I want to work on, and there are more than enough problems, so figure out on your own what you want to work on, basically, and then things fall into place naturally, basically. And that brings us back to what you mentioned at some point, George, during this episode, where you said that it's good to have a situation where you have more problems than people, right? Again, in my experience, projects, especially in the early stages, have a lot of things that need to be done. And then you just need to be good enough to be good at prioritizing and determining, okay, how fast do we want to move? How rigorous do we have to be in certain situations? Or, yeah, move fast and break things, or be very rigorous in this specific case of the project. So, yeah, I think I also like that, where everyone falls into a specific niche of the project that they are responsible for. Which is also like a single point of failure at some point, right? Because if they are the only one that did the databases, then if for whatever reason they drop out of the project, and then you're like, oh shit, okay, well, now someone has to fill the gap and has like some overhead of getting into it again or whatever.
Yeah, I think like what's an important sort of thought here is to know your strengths and weaknesses, right? Like understand what motivates you, whether you're like motivated by freedom and autonomy, or as you say, ownership, or do you prefer when you know the path and you know where you're going and you kind of have a feeling of sort of safety. And again, if you do know this, then you should also be honest with your like potential hiring managers, right? Like this, you're only going to burn yourself if you pretend you're someone you're not. And by the same token, for hiring managers, I wish they would be honest as well. Like if you're a micromanager, be honest about it. You know, like if you're the kind of guy who likes to run a tight ship and you want to, you know, you have a backlog that you and the like technical program manager have like extensively curated and you want people to work top down there, be honest about that. I mean, dress it up. Maybe say that you like run a tight ship and say like, oh, I like structure. I like order, you know, say that. Okay. It's kind of hazy, but you know, don't pretend like you like innovation and freedom. You know, just you're just going to make a problem for both yourselves and others. You know, like I really, one thing I find hard at communicating this, even though I've tried to communicate this to many people, is that I don't want to pretend that like one is better than the other, right? Like you do need more people who follow the plan than renegades who don't follow the plan. You know, like ideally, you know, you want like 4/5 the people to follow the plan, so the plan actually completes. And maybe you have one person who's like just hoovering up random stuff and finding new stuff and whatever, right? Like depending on the team, the balance can shift, right? But you know, if you can be honest with candidates, if the candidates can be honest with you, then everyone can get a situation that works better for everyone, right? If you lie about it, or if one or both parties want to win by getting the offer or join the team, then you're going to have a bad time later. Because like one thing that's also been funny for me is like having moved teams so many times is certain, I think, personality traits or things help you move team, help you change project, help you ramp up fast, right? Like if you have a high learning rate, if you're the kind of person who learns quickly, then of course you can change more often because that's not a problem for you, right? And partially this could be a function of time, right? Are you willing to spend your evenings and weekends learning stuff? Maybe not. And then maybe you're less inclined to want to move, right? You know, similarly, like can you treat things as kind of black boxes, and are you happy to do so, or do you need to really understand everything before you feel comfortable making a change, right? I'm the kind of person who joins a team or a project and like ships things like day one, or you know, just sometimes I break things, you know, sometimes I don't. But you know, I don't worry too much about it. Whereas I know other people who spend weeks reading all the documentation, being very careful, and of course they don't have any impact for weeks naturally, and of course then you run the risk that, you know, at the end of the year you've delivered less stuff, and so maybe you should not move too frequently. You know, similarly, like, are you good with people or not, right? If you are, then use that, leverage that. And if you're not good with people, then okay, maybe you don't want to tell people that, but you can just like not lean into it. I say, of course, if you have technical skills or knowledge, then that's obviously super valuable. One thing I actually find funny is how confident you are in your intuition. One thing that I've probably become done too much of is I tend to join teams and immediately see like things that are being done in a kind of foolish way, a stupid way, like they're doing it very inefficiently, and I usually call it out straight away. But that's very much a personality thing. I know a lot of people who do the opposite, who literally will join a team, see something stupid, sit there watching the stupid thing for 12 months, and then after 12 months be like, hey guys, we shouldn't all have like edit access on this database, and it's like, interesting. When did you notice this? And they're like, oh, the first week, Of course, if you do that, you could be wrong. So your mileage may vary. But it's certainly been fun, been magic.
So Max, we already heard a lot of your valuable advice here, but I guess one final one. Please give us one final more advice that if you could go back to your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give this younger version of yourself that might have changed your career earlier?
So I mentioned the interviewing early and often earlier in this interview, in this chat. So that obviously still stands. But the other thing that I've mentioned in the previous episode, I think, is this idea of becoming public sooner. Like I started posting on LinkedIn a little over 2 years ago. And that has been really, really valuable in my career so far. I think that's part of how I secured this new role at EXA, a non-trivial part. I mean, so the agency, which we saw with the book, but also the publicity, which really builds on this agency, right? If you just do a lot of stuff and people are aware that you do a lot of stuff, then people want you to do stuff for them. Kind of makes sense. So I think that I would, in hindsight, probably start posting publicly as early as after I joined Google, maybe if like 2013, 2014, maybe, or maybe 2015. I don't know. Like, because I mean, as soon as I started posting these things, I would start kind of getting kind of traction and visibility and whatever else. And to say, I was doing a lot of the things. I mean, while I was there, I was doing boatloads of Coursera courses and MOOCs. I was studying part-time in the different universities around Ireland and elsewhere. And I mean, not only is, this good from the point of view of visibility, it's also developing your communication skills, your writing skills. Actually, I was having an exit interview with one of my colleagues the other day, and I asked him, did he have any like feedback for me or any reflections or whatever? And he said that one of the documents that I wrote was beautifully written, and I was like, oh wow. That's now I've gone and done it, and I feel like that's beautifully writing.
If you go real deep, if you spend time in writing good documentation, damn.
Well, this was a more like a document to try and convince leadership to invest in a particular project area. But yes, he thought it was beautifully written, and I thought, that's definitely a side effect of me spending much more time and effort on writing. Like I find it much easier to just sit down and just blast out like paragraphs and paragraphs of like pretty good text now. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm the best writer, but I'm certainly a lot better writer than I was 2 years ago. And the more you practice, the luckier you get. So
I agree. I had a similar story with my YouTube channel, right? With me being public and meeting interesting people that way. But I think having spent 12 and a half years at Google has taught you a lot, and you could now share these lessons with the world so that other people that don't have these 12 and a half years at Google can benefit from that. And from what I can tell, it's a lot of more high-level advice. I mean, of course, everyone knows that you have to have technical skills, but I guess after you get into one of these companies where you also talk about how important it is to prepare for the interviews, which are notoriously difficult or out of everyday life distribution. But besides that, it seems like it's a lot of high-level advice and career growth advice and agency advice. And that might be surprising to many people.
I mean, I think that the thing that's interesting here is it's compounding, right? It's that if you make a little bit of progress every day, then it just builds up over time, and you get sort of stronger and stronger and stronger, right? Like the problem that I sometimes observe with others is just that they decide they want something and then they want to like prepare for it. They're like an actor who has to get in shape for a movie and was not in shape before. I mean, they usually succeed, but I think the people in real life don't succeed. That if you are like every day or at least every few times a week learning, moving towards your goal, like whatever it is, like reading papers, reading books, implementing projects, doing all of this stuff, and then these opportunities arrive, you're ready for them, right? You've got the artifacts to show hiring managers to like whether that's in your company or elsewhere. You're ready to interview at a moment's notice, and maybe you'll fail, but that's not a problem, right? Like you can get back up, and if you do fail, learn from that failure. Like go and revise the question you failed on, and it'll help you to kind of internalize it. Like all the questions, all of the tech interviews I've ever gotten real questions on, they're burned into my brain. Like I don't instantly know the solution, but I can usually like in a few seconds figure them out again. And I'm like, amazing. And like same with other ones. I can remember when I screwed up that interview or that interview, and it's great learnings. If you're just every day getting a little bit stronger, then you're going to be very strong at the end of a year, 2 years, 5 years. People tend to overestimate in the short term what they can achieve and underestimate what they can achieve in the long term, right?
5 years is a long time, and if you're consistent, you can have a lot of compounding gains, definitely. So with that being said, I think this was a great episode. I think we had a lot of fun chatting about all of these interesting learnings that you had gathered over these 12 and a half years. Now you are moving on to the next chapter of your AI life, of your career. Yep. And I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot of interesting updates there and stories there. And we'll be able to gather a lot of the signal out of the noise there as well. Cheeky little reference to the name. Okay, I think this was great. Thank you everyone for watching or listening, and catch you guys in the next one. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.